If you're considering a move to Richmond, you may be asking yourself the question, should I rent or should I buy? It's a fair question because the real estate market is constantly changing. With today's video, we're going to take a deep dive into the costs and other factors that will help you decide whether this is the time to rent or to buy here in Richmond. Let's get into it. I'm Greg Somerville, a local realtor here in Richmond. I create videos like this to help people understand what life is like in this great city. If you're moving here, or if you have questions of any kind, don't hesitate to reach out. Let's start with the obvious. Over the past few years, the cost of housing here in the U.S. has skyrocketed. Median home sale prices have gone up 31% since January of 2021. And the average rental costs increased 6.3% between 2021 and 2022, the biggest year-over-year increase in almost 40 years. Our country is dealing with its worst inflation since the 1980s, and that's jacked up the price of everything. But there's also been a shortage of new home construction. And the fact is that when demand exceeds supply, the prices go up and up and up. But here's some good news. For the past 7 months, rental rates across the U.S. have been dropping gradually, but they are still 17.3% higher than they were before the pandemic. National real estate trends are playing out the same way locally here in Richmond. Even though the inventory of available homes is 40% higher than it was at this time last year, the sale prices keep inching up. Median home sale price here in Richmond is $409,000. Analysts say you would need to earn $105,000 in order to afford the typical house here. Rental rates are also steep. I read a story about a guy who in 2017 was renting a 2-bedroom apartment in the Fan District for $725 a month. Well, he decided to move to Maine. When he moved back in 2023, he found that the same apartment was now renting for $1,495 a month, more than a 100% increase. That hurts. 57% of Richmond City's housing units are occupied by renters. Apartments.com says the average rental rate in Richmond ranges from $1,231 to $1,500 a month. The financial strain on renters here is actually worse than in some of the largest, most expensive cities in the U.S. Now, the cost of housing in Richmond is below the national average, but so is the average hourly wage. 52% of renters in Richmond spent 30% or more of their income on rent in 2022. That's a higher percentage than renters paid in San Francisco, Chicago, New York City, or D.C. In some cases, junk fees are pushing up the rental rates. People are being asked to pay for trash can fees, bug spraying, lease signing fees, in addition to the application fee. Residents here in Richmond are pushing back on some of these rates and seeing some adjustments. But in Richmond, as it is across the U.S., housing affordability remains a huge issue. I'm a big fan of Axios, one of the best online sources for tracking news here in Richmond. Axios published a graph comparing rental rates in Richmond with other cities in Virginia. So how many square feet can you rent for $1,500 a month? The national average is 728 square feet. In Newport News, you can get 1,068 square feet, 921 square feet in Virginia Beach, 898 square feet in Richmond, 640 square feet in Alexandria, and just 524 square feet in Arlington. Axios also published a list of helpful websites to help you find good rental options in Richmond. Fan Apartments, Real Property Management, Peak Property Management, and then these 5 Facebook pages: Lindsay's List RVA, Richmond VA Rentals, VCU Housing Sublets and Roommates, Richmond Housing Sublets and Roommates, and RVA Roommates, Rentals, and Sublets. As you wrestle with the decision whether to rent or to buy, you need to know how much each choice costs. Well, I'm going to make this easy. In the short term, renting will cost less than buying, period. In February 2024, Realtor.com released a report that said that in all of the top 50 U.S. metros, renting a home costs much less than buying a home. Their report included average costs for different sized apartments. Studio apartment, $1,426 a month. 1-bedroom apartment, $1,587. 2-bedroom, $1,889. They then calculated the cost of purchasing a home based on a few assumptions: an 8% down payment, a 6.78% interest rate, and then they mixed in homeowner association fees, taxes, and insurance. So what did they find? In February 2024, in the top 50 U.S. metros, the cost of buying was 60.1% higher than the cost of renting. But the difference was much much greater in Richmond City, where the median rent was $1,491. The median mortgage payment was $2,598. That's $1,107 more per month, or a 74.2% difference. A much bigger price than in 2023, when the cost to buy was 27.5% higher. Some cities are seeing the trend go in the opposite direction. For example, in Dallas and Miami and Minneapolis, the conditions are becoming more favorable to buy than to rent. High interest rates are a huge factor in making buying less affordable than renting. As you know, interest rates have hovered around 7% for the past year. I've been really excited in the past 2 weeks to see rates drop 0.5%. Nothing has greater impact on affordability than that. You may know this, but for every 1% decrease in the interest rate, your purchasing power goes up 10%. That means that if you can afford a $400,000 home at 7%, you could buy a $440,000 home if the rates drop to 6%. All of the market analysts I follow are predicting that rates should gradually decline over the next year. No promises, but that would be a game changer for so many of us. There's something very important we need to understand about the Realtor.com report. It focuses on short-term costs, not long-term investments. If you were to buy a home today, your mortgage payment would certainly be more than if you rented the same home, but your long-term wealth would be exponentially higher. Let me give you an example. I asked one of my favorite local lenders, Rob Rudd, to chart the difference between renting or buying a $400,000 house. I'm not going to explain every line in this chart. You can pause the video and read each note if you want. But here's the big picture. After 9 years, your mortgage payments would total $16,776 more than your rental payments. So yes, it would cost more to purchase than to rent. However, look at the top line. If you own this home, because of the home's appreciating value, your net gain in 9 years would be more than $163,000. That's almost 10 times more than the extra cost you paid for ownership. And it doesn't include the possible tax deductions you could claim. Renting a home meets the basic need for shelter. Purchasing a home, on the other hand, is a long-term investment. If paying an extra $17,000 over 9 years earns me an additional $163,000, I'm good with that. Listen, if you have any questions about these numbers, or if you would just like to talk about the value of long-term real estate investments, my number's on the screen. I'd love to talk with you. Let's wrap up with some simple pros and cons, starting with the pros of renting. Your upfront costs are definitely going to be lower. No closing costs, no down payment. You're not going to be paying maintenance and repair fees. If your air conditioning goes out, you won't be writing a check for $7,000 to get a new HVAC unit. And then finally, there's just more flexibility. If you aren't sure whether this is the right location for you or how long you're going to be here, renting may well be your best choice. There are some clear disadvantages to renting. Rentals tend to be in high demand but short supply. You're never going to get a tax deduction when you rent, nor are you going to see any equity gain. There's no investment here. You're putting your money down a hole. And finally, you're at the mercy of your landlord. If he or she decides it's time to sell, you're going to be looking for a new place to live. There are cons to buying as well, starting with the upfront costs. They're going to be higher. You can expect to pay about 3% of the purchase price in your closing costs. You might also face some competition from other buyers that drives the price and the stress way up. You're definitely going to deal with maintenance and repairs. So many stories about buyers who move into their beautiful new home only to have the refrigerator break down the next day. And then no question, you're going to be less flexible. Once you buy that house, you're committed. I have to end with the pros. Buying a home is such a fantastic way to build long-term wealth. Historically, home values appreciate about 4% each year. But here in Richmond, values have gone up 10% annually for each of the last 3 years. There are also tax incentives. You can deduct your mortgage interest and your property taxes every year, saving lots of money. You might also qualify for historic tax credits or economic opportunity incentives. But finally, and perhaps most importantly for me, is the freedom that homeownership gives you to make your house your home. Whether it's putting turquoise on the wall or putting a fountain out in your front yard, you get to make this space your space. And that is deeply, deeply satisfying. To rent or to buy? That's the question. And there are no cookie cutter answers. Your perfect choice depends upon your unique lifestyle, your financial goals, your time frame, your personal preferences. If you're thinking seriously about a move to Richmond, feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'd love to talk, help you explore the options, see what I can do to help. And if you're thinking about buying a home in Richmond and just want to talk about those numbers and see what it would take to make it work, my number's on the screen. Give me a call. Well, as always, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you on next week's video.